Hello, we are delighted this afternoon to be joined by Rax Lakhani, who is an independent public relations and digital marketing specialist. Rax also sits on the council of the PRCA and chairs their diversity network. But before continuing, I'm going to pass over to you, Rax, to introduce yourself in a little bit more detail for the benefit of everyone at home.
Hey, hi Grace. Really lovely to talk to you today. So my background is I've got probably over 2 decades now worth of experience working as a PR professional. I work, to say, independently, but over the years I've worked across loads of different sectors, loads of different kind of industries, specifically kind of giving advice and counsel on PR and comm strategy. And it's only really the last year or so that I've kind of formally taken on this role, sit on the PRCA Council and chair their diversity network. And I should explain the PRCA is the Public Relations and Communications Association. It's got about 30,000 members all over the world in 66 countries. And as an organisation, they're trying to always help members, agencies, in-house PR teams kind of with business advice, with providing them with kind of a way forward with what's happening in the outside world. And the diversity network was something that was set up as an individual group there alongside dozens of other really important groups. It's something I do in my spare time outside of my day job, although nowadays I don't really know what day job is, because I think we're all on lockdown, every day's the same. But it became quite important to me and to formally think about what D&I is, because when I first started in this industry, the first thing that struck me was there's a certain type of person that works in PR, and I don't think that was very fair of me. I think, you know, what I've learned over the years, it's actually a very there's a wide range of different roles and jobs and specialisms within PR. However, still today, I think when you talk to people who don't know what PR is, they have a kind of, it's a certain type of person that works in it. They think of fab, or they think of spin doctors in politics. And whilst there is an element of that in PR, although it's very, very small, people who currently work in PR get into it because they probably knew somebody who worked in PR. For me, coming in, I did a law degree, didn't know anything about PR. I came in, fell in love with it, and the role of what PR on comms is, in essence, is talking to the public. And one of the truths that kind of have emerged for me working within the industry all these years is that there is no one public. So when we talk about the public as a kind of like a homogenous group of people, it's just a lie. You know, there is no one way of looking at everybody. There are no shared experiences that apply to everybody. And the PR industry, and I think marketing industry and business as a whole, has been somewhat slow in kind of really facing this elephant in the room. And so what we've done, and I say we because I've been complicit in this, you know, earlier on in my career, is we start to define target audiences with really broad terms. So an example could be millennials, okay, or hipsters, or new mums. You know, I'm 41, and I'm 2 years away from being in that millennial category, which is ridiculous because I have nothing in common with someone who's really 20 years younger than me. But that as a classification is still upheld within comms and marketing sectors as a valid target community. When we talk about let's target new mums, you know, are we saying that all new mums have the same economic background or cultural experiences or requirements? But of course they don't. But you know, it's tempting to call them out. And very early on in my career, I remember this so well. You know, I was asked to research the brown pound, which, you know, when I think about it now, it's incredibly offensive. It's a way to target the Asian community in the UK because, of course, we're all the same. And it's ridiculous because, you know, it's such a broad spectrum of identities, of ethnic origins, of economic backgrounds, of careers, that it doesn't make sense to call it the brown pound. But in 2020, we still have agencies that I've worked in, looking at the pink pound, looking at how do we target the LGBTQ plus community. And even that word community is quite a loaded term. And what got me into kind of really thinking about where we need to be as an industry is this experience whereby I have been invited to speak on panels about the industry as a whole. And I have been actively told that we'd love to invite you on because the panel isn't diverse enough. And whilst a part of me really reels at that, because I'm thinking, well, it's a bit of tokenism, potentially, maybe not. The words used to kind of justify why I'm on that panel, regardless of my experience or whatever, really kind of, it frightens me, because as a person of color, as a non-white person, it reminds me that's sometimes how people will view other people. So what the industry doesn't do at all, it completely overlooks any sort of intersectionality. So it assumes that people will identify as one particular group, community, trait. So, you know, I by no means identify myself as someone of Asian heritage. Sometimes I do, but it's not my daily minute by minute kind of thing that forms my identity. I am now, I'll say, yeah, I'm comfortably middle class, but I'm from a working class background. I went to a state school. My parents were immigrants to this country from East Africa, and my grandparents are Indian. My wife is French. I have certain political views, certain health issues. Which one of those identities is me? Well, all of them and none of them. But the way that the industry kind of really approaches this is a very lazy, let's approach all disabled people as if they will have a very similar worldview, or let's approach all women or all men in a certain way. You could have got away with it, I think, maybe, and you did when I first started in the industry, when people had 4 or 5 TV channels and a lot of people bought a daily newspaper. It was very easy to reach certain targets. Fast forward to 2020 and beyond, we have multiple ways of consuming media, of where we get our information from, primarily digital, which is an area that I specialize in. So the experience of groups of people, I don't think it really holds up. Yet the industry is still applying those filters on society. And the reason that D&I is incredibly important is, unless you fill your organization with people who have different experiences or perspectives or backgrounds, or at least an understanding that the world isn't one unique experience, you're going to get it wrong. And not only are you going to get it wrong, the PR industry will not be able to move forward and not be able to communicate with people who have some very similar needs, but some very different ways of kind of understanding or engaging with those messages. So for me, D&I is less about representation of me as an individual, making sure that people like me, in God help it if there are other people like me, because I feel sorry for them. But it's more about, if we don't get it right, our industry is going to absolutely fail. And already it is starting. There are mistakes that are made every year, that because there's a lack of understanding on how to deal with different people. So the case, quite simply, is you should try, and my industry, and I think this applies to every industry, just try and challenge the homogenous nature of your staff, of your workforce, of your business processes, on the way that you get the most you can from the people you have access to, so that you can then do your job better and deliver to your consumers or your businesses or whoever your customers are. So that for me was why D&I needs to be talked about, and it's been a fascinating process. I just don't tell you that.
Super stuff. Thank you, Rax. And I suppose so. You've touched on a number of really important things there, from intersectionality to how diversity is sometimes misunderstood in terms
Mm,
of looking at it as quite siloed or stratified, and equally then what the business case for diversity and inclusion is in terms of being able to provide a more holistic
mm,
um, understanding of what society actually does look like. And so from there, I was wondering, would you mind exploring a little bit more what you understand diversity and inclusion to be
mm,
within each of those kinds of areas that you've just touched on?
mm. I think for me, from what you just said, I think whilst it's absolutely true that I think people are talking about diversity inclusion a lot more, and that's become apparent over the last few years, and that's a great thing. Let's not, it's a really good thing. I think where I've really kind of my frustrations lie, and I'm not alone in this, I think, is that how do we move this on? Because a lot of people are talking about it, but what's apparent when I'm out there talking about it is that there is no one kind of definition of what it is. So as I just said, I come out of meetings and people will project their own kind of where they feel that their organisation is lacking diversity upon that topic. And the more you try and dissect diversity and label it and frame it in a way that is about a single uh, trait, so gender is quite often, with the gender pay gap, which is incredibly important. But to kind of compute or use that as a synonym for diversity doesn't do any good really for the larger picture. Same goes for people kind of saying diversity equals representation of ethnic minorities, which again is incredibly important, as is representation of disabled kind of people with disabilities, or just different aspects. But the moment you start to apply it through a lens of excluding this society, this community, or these people, or this experience, the task becomes infinite. So you're going to then find something else. And the other thing is as well, I think the way we talk about diversity and inclusion is often when we talk about different categories of groups, it's about visible traits. So whether it's skin tone or disability or gender, or very obvious kind of political views or experiences, a lot of the areas of diversity which are just criminally overlooked are things like your social economic background, your educational background. We in our industry still, by far, we insist a graduate degree as a point of entry, and uh, yeah, and I've been complicit in that as well. When I, in the past, have helped hire for roles, I look for, they're great, they've got a university degree. It doesn't matter what that degree is. But when I look back on the hire I've ever made, one chap in particular sticks out. He, absolutely brilliant guy, left education at 16. Went to work in retail. Very, very smart guy. One of the most articulate guys I've ever met. Young guy, very keen, highly bright. Academia wasn't right for him, although I think he would have thrived in whatever he decided to do. Brought him in, but on paper, a lot of agencies would not even have looked at him. The guy had a skill set that was directly applicable to PR. He knew how to empathize, he knew how to communicate. He had different views and different ideas, yet we still currently insist on, someone with a graduate background. Now, the average age of someone in PR is 33, but it's still a very young audience. When we're trying to communicate with people of different ages, we completely apply our own biases onto that. So for me, diversity in itself, as I said, diversity applies to an organization. A person cannot be diverse, but a collection of people and an organization can be diverse. But diversity without inclusion, and it's been said time and time again, is counterproductive. It's quite dangerous. It can be seen as tokenistic, but also what you're doing is you're treating diversity as a box ticking exercise. So right now we've been talking about diversity a lot, within our own industries, and the panic situation is, let's treat diversity as something we can measure with a metric. And now I'm not against having some sort of validation that an organisation is open to being a much more diverse and inclusive workplace. However, to reduce it and to be reductive to the point that you say, hey, we've got, we've got a disabled Pakistani. Yes, great. We've got someone who identifies as bisexual. Great. We've got that doesn't really forward the cause of diversity. What it does, it makes people from those backgrounds feel that they haven't really earned the right to be there necessarily. But what it also does over time, those experiences that those people bring to the table are flattened out. So an example of this would be, and I was thinking a lot about how my views on diversity and inclusion have changed over the years. And I've been in the past working senior roles within agencies where we've boasted about having a great culture within the organization. Oh, we have drinks every Friday. Oh, we can work from home once a week. Or we can do this. And, we all go out, doing sporting events. And it's this really kind of cultural fit. But the moment you get someone through the door who is a carer, or who for religious or for health reasons doesn't drink, or who can't, go out after work, or who have a health condition that prevents them from doing kind of more physical activity, the moment you start to get those people through the door, they then feel they have to conform. So they either leave their identities at the door and come in and work and be part of this culture, or you're not going to recruit them in the first place. They're not going to be there, and you're missing out on something. So one of the things that I've learned is actively challenge who as an organization, I am encouraging to join the workforce. I want people who are different to me, people that I will get on with, hopefully, but people who can bring something different to the table that will, across the board, help elevate everyone's understanding of a different background or a different experience. And just by doing that a bit, I think any organization will see the value that drives. Now, that's inclusivity, that's inclusion. And so we all talk about D&I, and it's a thing now. You never have D without I. And I love a forced acronym. So I've been trying to bring in something at the PRCA called DRIVE, which is diversity, representation. So making sure that you're being open and getting those represented voices either within your workforce or the wider kind of stakeholders. Inclusion, which is the I. V stands for validation. So if this young chap that I hired who didn't have that university background, it took him a few months to kind of really feel confident that he was contributing. But when he did contribute, my God, it was an opinion that none of us had even ever considered. Okay, and we made sure that he knew that was because of him. So that validation is really important. And then the E stands for equity. So that's all the legal kind of frameworks that a lot of it comes from government, but nothing is stopping organizations going a step further and implementing equality measurements to make things accessible, to make sure that everybody is treated equally. Now, those 5 letters spell out DRIVE, which is very convenient, but I think it's a way of starting to redefine what diversity means. I would say, Grace, that very often when I just say the word diversity, eyes roll, because it's often now seen as something that people should be doing rather than a business imperative that they need to be doing. Mm-hmm. And it's often looked at through the lens of purely HR. Let's use the HR process to bring in a diverse range of people, rather than looking at through the other lens, saying, actually, if we have a diverse kind of DNA within our organization, something that celebrates difference, we will succeed and we will have a competitive edge and a USP, and we will commercially make gains from that, which is actually the case. Mm-hmm. So I think that the challenge is, how do we go from one to the other? And for me, the problem is this word diversity. I think people have been, it's been bombarded and thrown at people for so long as a health and safety, or as another GDPR, which is a purely kind of a legislative kind of tick, 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 that people, when they hear that word, they kind of close off what the real meaning is, and they see it as, oh God, yeah, we've got to get someone in HR to do that. So I don't know, how do we get people thinking differently about this word? In an ideal situation, we wouldn't be talking about diversity, or we would have another term that kind of still means diversity, but means a lot more, that everyone can get on board with.
Super
I
stuff.
think that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. That was so informative. So thank you, Rax. And I suppose, well, part of it seems like what you're saying is that certainly the policy side really does need to be backed up by the cultural and by best practice, meant earnestly.
Mm.
And as chair of the diversity network in the PRCA, how has, in terms, I mean, staff networks are integral to
Mm.
an organisation sort of beyond the HR function. And so how has that perspective informed that view, or how have you seen networks playing a role in achieving that?
I think it's been fascinating because I think there's a lot of talk. I mean, PRCA does a census every year on how diverse is the industry now. We've just reached globally the 100,000 mark in terms of members. And in the UK alone, there's about 95,000 people that work in PR. And our industry press and our industry forums and every event that is held, it still talks about diversity in the same way. So one could be forgiven for thinking that there has been an inertia and we're stuck at this place. The reality is that without any kind of real clarity from an industry level, a lot of organizations have been doing the most amazing things to figure out what diversity means to them. And it's a range of different initiatives, and some work for some organizations, some don't, but some common areas kind of have emerged. And I think that, having talked about kind of how frustrating it is in my industry, I have to say that the PR industry in the UK and beyond is probably doing more than other industries to address this issue. For me, it's just an impatience thing. It's happening kind of at a pace that could be kind of quickened up. But I think that what's lacking with organisations, particularly smaller organisations, is that they know that they should be doing it. They know that they need to be doing it. They just don't know how, because things have always been done the same way. So the way that we recruit staff, there's a whole another sector of recruiters out there who, you as a candidate, you put your CV through, and then it's a process that could probably do with disrupting a bit. We look for people in the same places, so we recruit out of a graduate pool. The PRCA and the Diversity Network, back in March of this year, just before lockdown, we launched an initiative called the Schools Outreach Programme, which is going into schools and educating kids and talking to kids about what a great industry this is. And I wish that I'd had that at school. I didn't know anything about PR until I went to a careers fair after university. So it's teaching school age kids, young adults, about the diverse kind of industry that we have in terms of what they can do, and that's great. How do you also showcase the case studies that we have? There are so many. There's so many great initiatives, from weekly kind of culture sessions over lunch that some organisations have, where people just share, a story from their background. They look at new technology, they look at new media, all those things. There's now awards that we've brought into the industry to really recognise kind of real examples of progressive kind of initiatives. All those things need to be shouted about. At the same time, there's a lot of concrete quantitative research out there. McKinsey is the obvious one that everyone talks about, saying that there is data out there to support that if you're a diverse organisation, at your core, you're more likely to outperform your competitors. But in my industry in particular, there are big brand names like P&G and Unilever and Diageo, who are now actively saying we will not hire any suppliers, i.e. outsourced marketing agencies or PR agencies, unless they can prove that they are committed to diversity. And that's interesting for me, because finally the impetus is there for people to say, right, if we do this, we can have a competitive edge. So there's loads of these amazing things. PRCA Diversity Network is trying to kind of collate those and to chat about those a lot more, and to also call out practices that probably need changing as well. So, so yeah, it's an interesting time, and I think overall it's quite optimistic. I think now there's an impetus there. There will probably be a lot more legislation in the coming years, like there was on data or health and safety. But I think my message to the members is get in there before that, because this shouldn't be something that you're forced to do. If you don't do it, you'll be losing business and you'll be losing the edge over other people in the space as well.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So there's a strong business case to be made.
Definitely. Also, from a staff retention point of view, one of the weird things, Grace, is that I help agencies recruit staff for positions. And one of the questions I've heard over the last few years, that's just astounded me, when I get young people, entry level, coming in, doing a great interview, and I ask them, have you got any questions? And I've heard probably 3-4 times now, yes, what is your policy on, or what is your diversity policy? And I've never heard that being mentioned or being asked about, but it's now something that your potential workforce are asking and they're interested in. And so that's a good thing. So there is some change out there, and I think you can't fake it. So if you're part of an organisation that is saying, I think you're very easily exposed by your day-to-day practices. And I don't think we're about tricking people or calling people out, and I think genuine mistakes will still be made. But I think overall there's a responsibility for all organisations in my industry in particular to just get behind this and treat it with the time, resource and dedication it clearly deserves. Yeah.
Super stuff. Thank you, Rax.
No worries.
And so further to that, early in that answer, you mentioned about how oftentimes, especially small companies, do struggle in terms of understanding where to begin. In that, say, they haven't really got a lot of experience in developing a diversity policy or in understanding how to adapt their culture. What kind of advice would you provide for people who are trying to determine where to start?
I think first of all, I think a lot of that fear comes from diversity is such a big beast that it's in some business mindsets, it's impossible to deconstruct. So we need to deconstruct what that actually means. So it could mean just actually having regular meetings of your staff. Most organizations like that have at least monthly meetings where they catch up on their head and talking about how do we about each other's experience, each other's backgrounds. When creative industries like mine brainstorm ideas or they come up with campaign ideas, I think it's quite good just to have something in place where you're actively challenging your own kind of thinking. Okay, so who are we actively excluding from this? Are we, and what do we need to do? Bring in external speakers once a quarter just to say that this is a campaign that's done really well. When these organisations fill out awards entries to showcase their work, I think a lot more awards entries now are compelled now to put in a section on, can you show how this reached a specific target audience and how did you creatively target them? So you're encouraging these organisations to just take a think about kind of what are they doing differently. I think for me, when I talked earlier on about culture of an organisation, whilst I don't think you can impose a culture, or it's very dangerous, I think, to say this is our culture and we're fun, boozing, this is what we are. I think that a culture is essential for any organisation. So even if you're a small organisation, your staff and your team and the way that you work and your environment will evolve this culture. And if in that culture you can do a few little things like even having a shared meal once a month and talking about your favorite meals from childhood, it will uncover conversations and those invisible areas of diverse experiences that you may not be aware of. I'm diabetic, but you won't necessarily be aware of it unless you see me injecting, but that informs a lot of my opinions when I'm buying food. So it's those little things I think that will really help. And just some basic checklists, trying to widen your area of recruitment. And also, I've got this thing that I'm obsessed with called Socratic PR, which this term that I've probably stolen from somewhere, but I think I've invented. And it's going on what Socrates said, the great philosopher, is just know that you don't know everything. Know that what you know is actually, you know, a lot less than you think. So as an industry, whether you're a big or a small organization, don't assume that your target audience all read the same newspaper and challenge that and ask questions. And I think pretty soon you'll see some really, really good things happening. Celebrate diversity, celebrate. And the only one thing I'll add, and I know I'm talking far too much, Greg, so forgive me.
Not
What I would add is also when it comes to this whole inclusion thing, I think that the way our processes as PR professionals, we need to really carve our own way. So the advertising world used to give us these broad categories and demographics. I would argue that demographics are very, very dangerous. And if you look at the current COVID situation and the comms around that. So one of my previous roles, I worked at the Ministry of Justice. I used to head up their digital communications in a previous lifetime. And the way government and local government communications and healthcare comms works is very, you have a very wide message, but there are certain truths that probably need to be dispelled. So, you know, all people will have a universal experience, and we all see a geographical now. Whether you live in London is a very different experience to maybe if you live in a rural part of England or Scotland, and we're always seeing like the devolved areas having different approaches and different messages for different communities. So not relying on the paradigms that have gone before when you're communicating. So not assuming that all people who read the Sun newspaper are of a certain ilk, right? Or all people who read the Guardian of a certain ilk, my mother is in her 70s and she is an avid user of WhatsApp, and she has friends and colleagues who are very active on Facebook. Now, nowhere have I ever sat in a pitch scenario and said, oh, well, let's target the over 70s using Facebook, but the numbers are there. So all these assumptions we always need to challenge. And I think that you can only really do that if you're thinking, well, what I know right now is probably not the bigger picture, so I need to inform myself how these people who are different from me think or how they consume stuff. And it might be the same, it might not be, but don't assume I know how that community gets its news.
Super stuff. Thank you, Rax. And I suppose as a final question and as a final sort of word of wisdom for everyone at home, with regard to the obstacles which organisations, which practitioners, which people who care about diversity and inclusion are facing in terms of realising it, what would you consider that to be, and how would you advise approaching overcoming it?
Oh, yeah, it's a great question. I think something I've been thinking about a lot recently is, sorry, it's just me diverting a bit and it will answer the question, is a few years ago, I had very, very bad back pain. Okay, and my doctor suggested that I look into meditation. And back then, the words meditation filled me with horror, because I had a whole kind of, it was a loaded term for me. I thought of hippies in the field, hugging trees, of incense, you know, yogis and chakras, and all those things really put me off, because that phrase, that term, meditation, wasn't really something that I was open to. And then what happened, interestingly, over the last few years, is people started talking about mindfulness. Okay, and I'm a massive fan of mindfulness. It keeps me sane, especially these days on the lockdown. And I'm a massive advocate of it. And in truth, mindfulness is just a repackaged meditation. Okay, so suddenly people are all over mindfulness. It's very trendy, and you know, a lot of organizations are embracing it in a way they wouldn't have done if it was called meditation. So using that as a kind of an analogy, as a metaphor, I think maybe diversity and inclusion have been talked about to death, that people have put their own kind of images onto what that means to them, and maybe a lot of that is negative, and maybe it's something that immediately brings their back up and it makes them resistant to it. And perhaps what we need as kind of as a workforce as a whole is to maybe rebrand or reboot, what D&I is into another term to be decided, so that it reframes it as a positive thing that exists not as one singular entity for a business to focus on, but exists culturally or institutionally across every part of the business. And it also then allows you to kind of look at it through a lens of absolute positivity. This is something to be celebrated. And I think what mindfulness did to meditation, when it started being talked about, with a different energy, with a different kind of spotlight on it, from it emerged loads of solutions. People then created apps, and people started to really bring it into the workplace, into schools, and there's less of a resistance to embrace it. I think that's what we need right now. We're all aware. I was aware of the benefits of meditation, but I was so put off by the term, I never wanted to do it because I never thought I could do it. So I think that's where we are. I think diversity currently needs to be celebrated, and to be shown for the positive elements it brings to all areas of a business. And I think those case studies are out there. I think, the stuff that Dods is doing and stuff that everyone else is doing out there, it's really shining light on the positive stuff. I think where we possibly need right now is to show that it's doable for everybody, and these are the universal benefits of D&I, in the same way that mindfulness anyone can do, and there are some general universal benefits of it. People might want to implement it in different ways, but suddenly it's something new and fresh and exciting, rather than something that has been talked about in a way that is almost shames people for not embracing diversity. And what we need to is to be the carrot and say, look, this is great, this is brilliant, try it out, it's easy to do, and the benefits are massive. So I guess that's my take, and maybe we need to collectively come up with something like that.
Super stuff. Thank you, Rax. And I suppose, it's a lovely positive note to end on, in terms of emphasizing what you're suggesting ultimately is a mindset shift, a focus shift, in terms of rather than thinking about culture in terms of the opportunities of going somewhere positive, rather than the challenges that one is facing. And so thank you for that. A really, really informative discussion. So much appreciated.
Hey, thank you very much. Thanks for all the great work that you and your team are doing as well. It's been really lovely to chat to you.
Super. Thank you.